study session of the Independent School District 535 School Board is called to order at 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday, June 10th, 2025, in room 137 of the Edison building. The board acknowledges this site and all RPS sites are situated on the ancestral land of the Dakota people, and we honor the Dakota nations and the sacred land of all indigenous peoples. Present at this meeting are school board members, Superintendent Kent Packel, a non-voting ex officio member, and Assistant School Board Clerk, Ms. Ann Kramer. Ms. Kramer, would you please call the roll?
Director Barlow? Here. Treasurer Cook? Director McLaughlin? Here. Clerk Marvin? Chair Nathan?
Here.
Director Whitehorn? Here. Vice Chair Workman?
Here. At this time, we offer the opportunity to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item 2.1 is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? Second. It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The agenda has been approved. The agenda and documents for this meeting are available online at rochesterschools.org/assembly. Our topic tonight, our focus topic, is the Community Budget Advisory Council conversation. Superintendent Packel.
Thank you, Chair Nathan and board members. This is a study session that, at least in our current thinking on the part of the executive committee, will become an annual event in which we have an opportunity to review some feedback from our Community Budget Advisory Committee. As board members well know, that is a new committee that we formed a couple of years ago and that we have restructured during the current school year. So also on the agenda tonight is an overview of a proposal for a change in the membership and a tweak in the focus of that committee. Before we get to that, to recap where we are, shortly after I got to Rochester and we came to grips with the financial challenges that the district faced and cut $21 million over 2 years and then successfully passed a referendum after not passing a referendum, we realized that financial issues, both human and financial resources, were going to be a critical part of our academic agenda, and then we recognized that there was a need for an opportunity for community input on those issues. And the initial conception of this committee, which board members took the lead in creating, was that we would ask area organizations that are key strategic partners of Rochester Public Schools to essentially nominate people with financial expertise or interest from their organizations. So from Olmsted County, from the City of Rochester, from Mayo Clinic, from United Way, from Rochester Area Foundation, with some other members that would be there as well. And we had certainly valuable contributions in the first 2 years of the committee's work, and you may, of course, remember people like Jen Woodford and Jerome Ferson providing feedback on that. But candidly, the hypothesis that organizations in the community would have people with financial expertise who would be able to essentially represent the stakeholder organization and utilize their financial expertise proved to be a very, very heavy lift. And so we were finding that while everybody agreed that the financial success of the school district was of paramount importance, getting people to commit to the significant but not overwhelming work that we hoped the committee would do was proving to be a real challenge. And so in talking with the chair and vice chair, and then of course with our finance team, we decided to open up the second wave, it's a 2-year term structure, of membership on the committee to anybody who is interested in helping us think creatively and incisively about finances in the school district. And we were shocked at the response of people who were very interested. And ultimately, we were able to welcome to the committee everybody who was willing to commit the time. And in James O'Connor, we have one member of those folks. So on behalf of James, you and everybody else, thank you for being willing to sign up. As James and I were just chatting, this is a steep learning curve. And so the committee is beginning to grapple with some of the issues that the board grapples with at every meeting. And so it's our strong hope that if your board will approve the restructuring that we've moved forward with, because we really wanted to not postpone this, that a year from now, this committee meeting, this study session, will be an even more robust opportunity to dig into both short and long-term financial issues on the part of the school district. But we wanted to keep this meeting here. Board members have received a written overview of the feedback that was from the last meeting. This restructured committee has had 2 meetings, and I'm sure we may hear about that a little bit from James or from John or Denise or Andy, who've been facilitating the work of the committee for our staff. What I wanted to do, though, before I turn it over to hear a bit from James and some of his observations on the committee, and then we open it up for board member observations and questions, I wanted to share a few of my reactions to the summary written document that board members received, which was based on notes that were taken in small groups. And so these are my personal observations on it, and I'll be brief, but I think the purpose of our conversation tonight is exactly for board members and staff and James to do the same, so that we are both asking questions but sharing observations. So very briefly, I was really pleased to see in the notes, and I should say, not at the meeting, that the committee really stressed the importance of long-term financial planning. In fact, next week I will propose a set of 5-year financial targets that will be, I will recommend the parameters that you direct me and the team to use in developing that long-term financial plan through 2030. They will be very challenging financial targets based on the recent enrollment projection that you saw. So I really appreciated that the committee is urging us to think not just about the next fiscal year, but about the long-term budget. I do think it's also important, and it's not surprising in a committee that is looking at a almost $400 million total budget, $300 million general fund, that certain things may be high profile, but we have to put the high profile in perspective. So I noted that athletics got some conversation. I think that is deserved, but it's important to note that athletics is about $3.5 million of a $300 million budget. And so while it is high profile, while it is outside the classroom, things like the number of staff we have, the level of compensation and benefits, the level of service we provide for things like special education services is the much bigger driver of our financial bottom line. But some of those things that are kind of flashpoints, because they're so visible, are deserving of conversation but need to be put in those contexts. The committee in the summary mentioned class size increases. I think it's really important to reaffirm for board members that we have not changed any of our class size targets, and such there's been no systematic change in class size in Rochester Public Schools. Since the second year I was in Rochester when we did raise our class size by 1 as part of a $14 million reduction that year. Now individual class sizes fluctuate as enrollment fluctuates in schools and grade levels, but we have not changed those targets. And the commitment in the 2024 referendum was not to change them for the first, at least the first 5 years of the 10-year referendum period. I was glad the committee noted the importance of understanding the categorical funding streams that we have in our work: compensatory aid for low-income kids, special education funding for kids with disabilities, multi-language learning funding for kids whose first language is not English. Understanding the intended use of these dollars is a really big deal. And as we've talked about in doing the balanced budget model, the state recently tightened up the allowed uses of compensatory funding. And in the legislative session that just concluded, they have created a task force to come up with the future of compensatory funding. And while everybody is held harmless for 1 year, we are not held harmless the year after. And so this is a big, big deal for Rochester Public Schools, understanding what changes might be made and how funding is allocated to support kids who live in low-income families. I was glad to see the committee highlighted the importance of Medicaid reimbursement. This is a relatively new process for school districts. It is potentially an invaluable source of support for the holistic support many of our kids need, but it is a complex process that also is labor intensive to be billing correctly. And so it's a really important thing for the committee to be watching and for us to be rolling up our sleeves around to be sure that we're maximizing those dollars to provide those services. But it's a heavy lift to do that well. I noticed also in the committee notes that there was a question about the role of education support professionals in determining class sizes. And it's important just to say we don't include an ESP in the class size ratio, though we do add ESPs to supplement classes where the class size is heavy or the challenges are significant. But it is the teacher-student ratio that determines our class size ratio. I was really glad to see the committee mention teacher retention. Teacher retention is a vastly emphasized cost of essentially wasted resources in school systems. When you invest in a new teacher and they move on, as many do after the first 3 years, you lose the investment that you have in their understanding of your curriculum, your processes. And so the job satisfaction and effectiveness of our teachers over the longer term is a critical financial issue that we need to be looking at. I will say I think we've, certainly compared to some districts, done pretty well with teacher retention, but it certainly exists, as you see every board meeting in the back of the board book as you look at that. I was also excited to see the committee mentioned artificial intelligence, not just for instruction, but for operations. We have just convened our first initial working group to define the issues for AI in Rochester Public Schools. I have the report, but haven't even read it yet, and we'll obviously be sharing that with the board. I'm participating in a national superintendent learning network that is funded by a grant with the School of Business at University of California, Berkeley. And so this is going to be a huge issue for us in thinking through the future, not just of our finances, but of our strategic plan. I know in the committee's first meeting, they had a robust discussion of enrollment. In fact, I think it kind of took over the meeting. You were seeing something that we now all are seeing very clearly. So I'm really glad that is a major issue that is an emphasis. A couple more final things. I really appreciated the committee seeking to connect our strategic initiatives to results, the investments that exist. And there's a pretty robust body of evidence around cost-benefit analysis in education. The trick is often that a lot of your costs seem sunk. 85% of your staff are your existing staff. And so to decide how you assess the value of what a classroom teacher does tied to a test score or a graduation rate is very complex, because unlike sometimes in business, we're not allocating new resources toward one very focused example. The example I've used sometimes, and some of you may know this history, when the Dayton brothers saw the writing on the wall for Dayton Hudson and the traditional department store, they literally sent one brother off to Florida, gave him a bunch of money, and said, go invent something to compete with Walmart. And that became Target. And they completely walled it off to have a very different low cost. And of course, now Dayton Hudson is gone and it's Target Corp. They were able, with those private resources, to completely resource a new strategy. We, of course, rarely have that luxury in education, because we have the fixed ongoing costs. And so for us to assess the impact of our academic strategy tied to our dollars is a challenging thing, because how much of a classroom teacher's time ties to our literacy strategy when they're also teaching math and science and other subjects? It's not to say we shouldn't be doing it. I'm glad the committee talked about it. It's critical. 2 final points. Glad the committee emphasized the importance of fund balance. It's something we need to be using strategically and appropriately. And then finally, that they also want to understand the connection between our school improvement plans and our budgets, which we need to keep tightening up. So, Madam Chair, those are some of my observations on the committee's written report. And I don't know, Denise, if you think that turning it over to James is the best next step, or Kathy, if you want to handle it any different way. I want to thank Denise in particular for facilitating the work as the person coordinating this work and many other efforts about strategic use of resources.
Yes, we're very excited about all of our new members. We have a robust discussion so far at all of our meetings, and really appreciate the input that they provide. I also want to thank Ronald for being part of our team. So, James, do you want to start off? We do have another member that's going to be joining us probably.
Sounds good. All right. My name is James O'Connor. I retired a couple years early after 23 years in information technology and software engineering at IBM. I have 5 children, 2 that have gone up through the RCS system, and 2 that are Lincoln in the fall, a 2nd grader and a kindergartner, and lastly a 2.5-year-old. And I'm really interested in all things finance and the dismal science of economics and have some time. So I'm here to get up to speed on RPS and budget and revenue and expenses and signed up for CPAC. So that said, what we speak to today. Dr. Pakel talked about a number of the things we've brought up. And just in my comments to him before the meeting, you know, I think a lot of it's really working well. We've had really good turnout. We have really good engagement. It can be hard when you don't turn anyone away to channel people in the right direction. So as you've pointed and addressed some of the things we brought up, that some of them are definitely related to finance, but that isn't the primary focus. And so I think if we can find a good way to get park some of those issues. The second meeting went really well. This last one, I think we got off in the weeds a little more on class sizes, unemployment for ESPs, just political things, mental health grants, referendum, perception versus reality, right? And I have to circle folks back and say, hey, we're here to talk about the money. I have some other ideas of things you can do to kind of improve engagement, maybe make things flow a little better. One would be we've done a really good, Janice has done an excellent job of giving us pre-reading material, but we don't necessarily see the slides or the discussion topics till we get there. And I think when people see those slides and they see the classroom thing for the, you know, just kind of, if they got the week or two in advance or kind of shape the meeting, I think we could park some of those things a little better. Other areas for improvement may be to encourage more participation. So one idea I had was to have committee members, if they're willing or nudged or pushed, to go present the budget back to PTSAs or things like that, to go back to their schools and kind of close the loop. You know, you've educated us. Let's continue that, because I think there's a lot of confusion. You know, when we got to the revenue one, a lot of us, a light bulb went on that we've hit, you know, peak birth rate and we're going down, and all of our revenue is tied to that, right? And so we're gonna have to do a better job of doing more with less and being innovative, and AI's come up a number of times, and where can we be efficient? I think it'd be good to focus a little more on the budget balance model. I still haven't made it all the way through the memorandum at the beginning of the year, but I glanced enough to see that the thing I wanted to mention wasn't in there, and that would be, you know, I think it's good to give the principals this control, but you're gonna need some kind of feedback loop, a dashboard or a bulletin board where they can share things that are working well for them and things that aren't. To kind of help each other out as you decentralize that, you know, which principals are really excelling at this task, and they help some of the ones that are struggling. Same thing, I mentioned, you brought up kind of the 5-year plan, and that was actually one of my questions to John, so I highlighted that here, but, you know, can we get more than a year over year? Can we get some kind of trend of what the last 5 years or 10 years have looked like to kind of spot macro problems, not just immediate? And then I think it would be really neat, you know, we're talking about budget and we're approving a budget, but where do we close the loop on the actuals? You know, to have a kind of the third meeting, you know, as we close FY25, how did we do? Were we close? Were we on target? Were we under? You know, just to kind of have some accountability, and to make future budget revisions more precise, right? And then the last one would be just to kind of get people brainstorming ahead of the meeting, even with hypotheticals. So if you came and said, you know, referendum, it's got us covered for 5 years, but in 5 years, we might have a problem. Start getting the CBAC committee thinking, let's prioritize expenses and what would be good things with community input to cut first, right? Offload some of the tough decisions and the pain earlier to the committee and get more input that way, instead of shocking the whole community in 5 years with, we've got to close these schools, right? So, similar to the sports thing, right? We all have our hot button issues of things it's not gonna move the budget needle. But, you know, if we prepared folks and we said, hey, likewise, you could turn around and have the same hypothetical in a year where there was a surplus, where should we expand our services? Where can we grow? Where can we? I think that's most of my prepared thoughts.
This is Katie Girardi, and she is also a new member of our Community Budget Advisory Committee. So she'll share a little bit about her involvement and some of her thoughts so far.
Sure. Do you want me to go through all these or just
I do
highlight
not-
them? Okay,
do not
good.
want you to go
Okay,
through.
good.
So you can start off by just sharing a little bit about
Sure.
your involvement with the district and kind of your motivation for joining CDOT.
Sure. So my name is Katie Garrity. I have a daughter who just finished Kellogg and is going into Century, and my son is at Jefferson. A couple years ago, I was the PTSA president for Jefferson for 2 years and was able to fundraise enough money in 9 months to rebuild the kindergarten playground for the kindergartners and kids that have autism, with experts to make sure that the playground equipment met the needs of the individuals that are using it. And I have been working in association management, which is kind of similar, I feel like, with some of your roles. So dealing with major budgets, getting people to approve it, and then executing it for the year, as well as the objectives. I think just the two biggest things that came out of this for me is a lot of folks that are moving to the district, or other districts or other school districts, why? And then can we, and it's not necessarily our committee, but it could be if there's budget implications, if we can fix that. And then I also think that the communication piece is, I know that we send out quite a lot of information and emails, and I love that, but I love the videos that you've been doing, like the snow day one, make it fun, make it playful, make people feel part of the community. Those are, and a lot of folks were saying that as well, because I think there's a lot of things that are going on that are really positive, kids that are doing exceptionally well and getting into Harvard and Yale, and it's those are the types of things that we need to be shouting, our school system is the best choice. So I think explaining why and being positive about it, and also really being clear and addressing some of the issues that are coming up of why people are moving districts.
Thank you, Kate. Any questions for our members? Or
I'll go ahead and start. James, you raised an interesting point in terms of what I heard and envisioned was the possibility of members of this committee being budget advocates or ambassadors. That has been a role that has been assumed by John, superintendent, and but with the proper, I think, scripting rather, you guys could probably speak more directly to the citizenry in a way different than it may be expected out of, well, of course, the director of finance, a chief fiscal officer, I'm sorry, would, present a certain view. So I appreciated hearing that. I'm sorry, your first name is?
Katie.
Katie, yeah, okay. Student retention, so important, and it's something we're looking at, trying to get a better handle on, and any ideas you might have, the committee might come up with, certainly you should know we will be receptive to, and it's good to realize that even though you're new members, we are closely aligned in terms of viewpoint, outlook, and shared mission focus. So thank you and welcome.
Thanks as well. What for both of you was the biggest surprise so far, financial or non-financial? Just in, you know, in the early meetings, something you didn't necessarily expect coming in.
I think for me, the biggest surprise was when we covered the various sources of revenue and funding, that the referendum dollars were also per pupil. I assumed they were just assessed based on property value or flat kind of, you know, like we asked for $10 million per year or whatever, and we divided that by the properties and you got your assessment, right? I didn't understand that. Yet again, as our population declines, that source of funding goes down as well.
In fact, I appreciate that. I recently had a meeting with folks who ran, obviously separately from the district, but ran one of the 2 outreach campaigns, and they wanted to come meet with me after the referendum, and it was precisely this point that they were not understanding. And I thought, wow, like, you know, obviously when you're trying to communicate a very simple message in the middle of an election, you don't want to go too far down in the weeds. And we never said that it wasn't generated by per pupil, but we also didn't like make super clear that the 19.4 million is our projection based on our current enrollment. And so if it went up, it could go up. If it went down. So this was a good meeting. When literally it was across the hall, and these folks who gave hours and hours and hours and hours to the referendum literally said, oh, because they assumed it was $19.4 million every year, the gift that keeps on giving it flat. And I said, oh no, it's about enrollment as well. So I don't know that I would have put that in an FAQ for sure. Like now knowing what I know, I don't know that I would have had it as like the lead, because that was a lot for people to understand, but yeah, I appreciate that. How about you, Katie? Anything?
I agree with that. I think the amount of how it's actually declining, which actually makes sense, like if people are having less kids, that would be kind of a natural, but the fact that so many people are choosing to go outside of the Rochester Public Schools. I also graduated from John Marshall after going to Catholic schools, and I absolutely loved JM. And so in my mind, JM was a far superior high school than Lourdes. And so that was kind of surprising to me, and I think that for a community as a whole, investing in your education, having the big city have a really good school system is important for everyone. So I think just the enrollment was I was sad to see so many kids go to like Byron or Stewartville when we have such a good school system here.
We, as board members know, not keep going, Madam Chair, but we did roll out the enrollment study that you were actually the first people to see, and then we also have since launched a new strategy and identified new leadership for an enrollment initiative that will go into high gear next fall.
Dr. Whiteley.
So, and what you each said, were there any ideas? I know that you mentioned some things that, so James, you mentioned some things about encouraging more people to get involved with in the CPAC, and you also mentioned the communication, and because our funds are directly linked to our pupils, something that I also noticed in there was, you know, the teachers' hesitancy with the parent volunteers. So I'm just curious, and just the conversations that you all have had, have you thought of any solutions? Because I think a lot of the concerns you have are concerns that we've had kind of across the board with a lot of the systems, but in working in the community and in your group, have you heard any interest in solutions to any of these concerns, or something that we maybe haven't looked at or overlooked?
I think the communication is key, because that's going to help change the perception, which I think perception is incorrect of, you know, people needing to want to leave the district. And Denise and I have kind of emailed a little bit about, you know, there's probably other cities, like I'm thinking like Madison, that's a little bit bigger, that probably is having similar issues. So I think for me personally, I would love to like reach out to similar sized districts to see what, you know, what issues that they're having and what solutions are working for them. I mean, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I'm sure this has happened as cities grow. So I think that's a big thing. And just having people identify and being proud of having a Rochester Public School student. And, you know, I don't know about like a bumper sticker, but like in communications, having like, you know, parents being proud, you know, like on your like Facebook, you know, and why they're proud to have a child in the Rochester Public Schools. And so many people move to this area. I mean, this is why I'm back, is because the school system is so good, and it is a great place to raise your kids. So I think that type of communication. And then I also think, you know, I don't know how often we can, or if we're able to poll people that have left. I know sometimes they're asking for their transcripts if there's like a 5-point survey. So if we're seeing like major trends, like middle school doesn't have the athletics that, you know, Asturville or Byron does, then that's something that we can address on like a budget level.
Good exit survey.
Yeah. So those are kind of our main thoughts that kept circling around.
And I guess just to add to that, another undertone I'm hearing is like transparency. Not that information is not available, but that people are not getting the correct information, right? We keep talking about how people are viewing the referendum, and this is common. So again, do you have any suggestions for how to, you know, because even on the board, even some of us have misinterpreted information. Do you have any thoughts on how we can maybe work with that?
Best idea there is going again back to the ambassador idea and turning us into, you know, trained messengers. Again, we're messengers with that caveat. If people come, you know, with sharpened sticks and spears, we're just the messenger. Here's information about the budget, you know, and we don't want to mislead people, so there has to be some training, but to spread the message, right, to get it out to our school communities and our neighborhood communities, and talking about, you know, how the referendum works. This is how revenue works. This is how the birth rates, you know, if we can go out there and do that as part of our service to the committee or subcommittee or something, you know, even if you just picked, how many people are on the committee, Denise?
About 30.
30.
Yeah.
Even if you trained, you know, 6 to 10, a third of them, right? And we're comfortable with those people doing them, and they had the extra time to go to you know, 2 or 3 schools each, go to a PTSA meeting or to, you know, answer questions. I think, you know, the very nature of this business is open, but I think you have to dig a little bit to find it. You know, even the meeting minutes and agendas here, they're all linked and you can go find them, but I think we can do a better job of spreading, you know, telling people where you can go see these things. And here's this, you know, turning this finance committee and experiment into kind of an open source. You know, we're playing with an open hand. And a similar thing when you're looking at other schools that are school districts and cities that are having this problem, you know, they are also operating in an open environment with their budgets and things, right? And so if we can get committee members to go and look into that research, you know, go pull Madison's budget for the next year. How are things are changing, you know, that people in this room may not have all the time to do, but offload some of that and find that the key findings and bring it back.
I also think that we need to explore how parents, because I think the main thing is marketing. They might not necessarily care about like what the budget numbers are, like as long as we're saying like we're budgeting neutral. They're concerned about, you know, violence in the middle school. They're concerned about test scores. So addressing those in communications that are digestible for parents. Parents are getting although we're having kids later on, kids, like Gen Z has kids in the school district. How are they digesting news? I bet you majority of them get their news on TikTok. So we need to think about what the message is and then how to communicate it. And it's probably not in a long, lengthy email with a attached PDF or a click to a website. It's like really digestible, like we all are just go, 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 go. You know, utilizing talking points, you know, because that's a retention, so we're trying to keep people involved. So like there's two issues essentially, is retention and then also bringing people back into the district.
And I got one more question, maybe, I don't know. But in the committee that you have established of 30 people, how would you say, and not just the diversity by race, but the diversity of minds, do you feel that you have a good group of people to be able to address different perspectives? You know, do you think that you're doing well on that end? Because I know you're saying you're not reaching out to people, so you know, we don't want to end up with a committee of, you know, you want to have the diversity of minds so that we're really getting good feedback. Yeah.
I think the consistency is plenty diverse. I don't have the specific numbers, but male, female, different races, different backgrounds. There's a lot of very intelligent people on the committee, which is good. A lot with strong management and finance and backgrounds.
And I've disagreed in my head with some of them, which I think
Oh,
is
sure,
good, which
sure,
is
yeah,
good.
yeah.
So you want to have like a thought, you know, because for me, I'm like, just all the money to the teachers and paras, and you know, and there are other people that are like nickel and diming, like, oh, do we really need? Can paras really have unemployment? Do we really want to pay for that? And so I think that's good to kind of have a little. I mean, we weren't clashing, but it's just difference of opinion.
It's one of the ground rules that Denise speaks to almost every time, and that's disagree with ideas, not with people, and I think we've done a decent job of that. I think we have to do a little better job of speaking, you know, herding cats and reining people in and saying, hey, let's park that. We hear you. We wrote this down. Let's move on to these other things we want to cover today.
I think one of the impressive things looking at the summary of your last meeting, was how many of the essential issues you raised that we've been talking about or we're already projecting. So I feel like not only is that a validation, but it's also showing that we're on the right track to continue to engage this kind of community advisory piece, because we're just going to boost each other's work. But now that you know a little bit more about what you know, and you're both parents, you've talked a little bit about the amount of information and making it easy to be available, and we know not everybody is going to take a deep dive. So, as parents of students, what are some of the most important pieces about the district finances that you think parents want to know? If we had to give them the high-level highlights from what you've learned so far, what are the things that either make you feel more confident in your child's education, or things that you want to track to, you know, sort of make sure that your kids or the other kids in your school are getting what they need?
I think just a lot of the high-level numbers are really useful and digestible. So the $400 million in revenue, and the number of principals, and the number of board members, and the number of teachers and paras, and kind of rolling some of those things up and saying that most of our budget is people, and that's true of any organization, right? They need healthcare, and they need all these things, right? I think just kind of having a high level, I think the committee level is too detailed to roll out to the broader public, right? To give them pages and pages of PDFs and documents. But I think if it's even a question we can pose to the committee or a subcommittee itself. What are the things you want to know, right? Prioritize. Give us 10 things on a bullet list and put them out on a slide or a flyer, and go back to your PDSAs and chat with people. You're right. There are a lot of people that aren't budget wonks that are not going to want to hear this message. But if we can hit some that may have a passing interest and at least offer the information, I think that's useful, instead of in times of crisis where
close schools or make hard decisions, or let go of teachers or do those kind of things as we're shrinking, get that bigger message out there about the birth rates and enrollment. Just at, again, just at the high level, this is what we're forecasting, and this we're doing good for now, but 5 years from now, things are gonna be a little tight again. Let's prepare folks for that, right?
I think class size is huge for parents. I also like when we were discussing the budget, when we're budgeting for salaries, that it is, for the most part, a teacher is hired for the school year and will fulfill that contract for the end of the year. So I thought, isn't that what you said?
Yep.
So I guess I didn't really think about that, but I really like that, commitment to the people that are in your district. I also think that scores in terms of testing are something that we need to carefully communicate. I mean, if you're going like, a John Marshall versus a Leward, well, like, all of the John Marshall is like absolutely everyone. So you're gonna have people that are really high and really low, and where it's like it's comparing apples to oranges. You're not doing apples to apples. I don't know how you communicate that. So like when people are comparing Rochester to different things, it's not really fair. It's not a fair comparison. So I think class size, teacher commitment, if there's like retention stats, sometimes that's good. Like for instance, my kids had some of the same teachers throughout, and so that was really neat. Something kind of cool to communicate.
You could just react to this, and not just our two committee members. One of the reasons I think this committee is invaluable and will be over time is that I think we are living in a time of extraordinary distrust of institutions and leaders. Like visceral. You're almost presumed wrong as a starting point, and it runs really, really deep. I was thinking the other day, my dad's family that he grew up in was super conservative, Republican. My mom's was not super, but very liberal, like Democrat. They both trusted Walter Cronkite to get their news deeply. Like that, like there was that commonality. Like if Walter Cronkite was telling it to us, we really could trust that. I mean, that's so long gone. And so I think the fact that you're going to be a group of people who aren't getting paid or didn't run for the school board who will have this. So you may, even if you disagree profoundly with how we're dealing with class size or enrollment or fund balance or something, the fact that I would hope, because I certainly know it's true, that you can also say, but they're not cooking the books. They're giving you, like, these are the numbers are the numbers. We've certainly tried to take that approach with our unions. I think it's one reason why we've really changed the relationship with a lot of our unions. Like, we can debate the priorities, but we're not hiding money under the table that we're not, sharing with you. That's been a complete paradigm shift for some of our negotiations. Like, really, we're not, and so now we can have a robust discussion about the priorities, but it's there. And so I just think that's one of the things that, again, it's not saying the committee necessarily will be, and necessarily as your work gets deeper, endorsing everything we're recommending, but that you've seen the numbers. And that I think that your point, James, too, about that we really should make sure that you get the after action review of the budget, too, so that you're seeing.
I think it would be nice to have a dashboard or something, like
Yeah.
you have a test score dashboard or a school improvement dashboard, have a finance dashboard.
Absolutely.
What, just to have these committee minutes are out there on the website now, but if you had a similar thing that was all financial, I think that would help your principals and people in the balanced budget model too, as they're looking,
And I'm assuming it's
different
audited
schools.
by an
Correct.
outside firm.
How many
It is.
clean audits in a row have we had, Superintendent?
We are at 5 in a row. We don't, though, do very much to make that those clean audits very, to your point about the videos and snow days and stuff, we haven't done much to make our audit videos funny and short. I should say this, John did one video where he looked like a hostage. That was pretty good. Oh, I can't remember, but anyway. Yeah, we can keep working on those kinds of things.
Yeah, make it a snappy 60-second.
Yeah, it was a good early effort.
Yeah.
Cartoons.
Well, the cartoons were for the referendum. Those were a little better. But I mean, the point about where did our audit really, you end up, I mean, literally in a $400 million organization, they found not a single finding.
Yeah,
not one.
absolutely.
And like, we need to find ways to message that, because I remember my first year when the auditor said that it's quite extraordinary to see an external audit an organization of this size, and we didn't find a single control problem, we didn't find a single reporting problem, which again is how we maintain our books. We still have to make good decisions, but the money is not being poorly managed in that sense of accounting.
Yeah, a couple things. The committee expressed some concern that we're projecting financial challenges now. And I think the tension becomes, oh, you're having challenges now versus if you don't say anything 5 years from now, they're saying, why didn't you tell us? You know, so while we're trying to tell them what's coming up down the road, they don't want to hear that. Maybe some don't want to hear that. Versus, you know, telling them now or having it be a big surprise. So just an observation on that. The question that I had though was, did you have any discussion about federal and state mandates, some of which are unfunded or underfunded?
I mean, we talked about one of the titles going away, and
We talked about federal grants and difficulties in
And
this
fears.
political climate. We also talked about state allocations and not keeping up with inflation at length, which I think was useful, right? To see the curves, you know, kind of diverge, and this is where things would be if the state.
so we made assumptions, like hopeful assumptions, I think, of like, for the most part, state and federal funding being somewhat even from last year, or maybe up like 2.5%.
Yes.
And this funding's complex. I mean, that's one of the other things I didn't I mean, I knew an organization of this size, you know, big budget, a lot of people. I didn't understand all the different buckets and the requirements. You know, we can't steal extra money we made on lunch this month and go give a teacher a bonus.
Yeah, that was
You know,
interesting.
We don't have that flexibility to, you know, we have 2 dozen different buckets, you know, it's almost like separate budgets, right? And we're just kind of rolling this all up. So that's.
Yeah, I think we're used to, as a society now, when you were talking about the news, it reminded me of, we're used to like customizing like absolutely everything in our life, like where our apps are, what phone we have, and I think parents sometimes, if like one thing goes wrong, they're like, how, like jump ship or move something or move somewhere else, so they feel like they don't have control. So I think addressing that, like with over communication and control that they have in their own schools, I think will be able to help
I think
retention
you
as
tell
well.
them that 5 years there's a problem, and 4 years there's a problem. You keep telling them there's a problem until they're ready to listen. You have to meet the people where they are, right?
Yeah, and to restate, I don't think it was that the committee felt like there was a concern about the upcoming challenges being communicated. I think it was just coming as a surprise, even to our members, that, you know, so quickly after the referendum passing, unfortunately, still with our declining enrollment. So I think our members appreciated that message was being shared, and it was being shared now.
Even though we knew that some people would still say, well, we already gave you all this money. So you're probably hearing that too.
And James, you mentioned something as part of your discussion about an ambassador role, but also the idea that if there are future reductions or additional money coming down the road, that CBAC or a similar group of community members could do some advanced thinking.
It could help
In-
prioritize where to cut things. I think that would be useful, right? If you,
Well, that was gonna be my question, because in the past, we have had community budget reduction committees where we've given them intensive sets of information,
crickets.
page by page. And I'm sort of want to hear from you as members of the community, as volunteers, not paid. How do you think people would feel? It's an important role. It's a tough job. What do you get the sense of people being willing to take on that kind of deep advisory piece? Especially when you're talking about cuts. Everyone's talking about options, but what about cuts?
Well, I know that we had to take some out of reserves to have a balanced budget, correct? So we didn't have to go through that exercise. But I think folks would be open to going through.
I think it's a valuable exercise because it allows the diverse community to prioritize where they think those cuts should come from, right? You know, we all have to make decisions like this in our home budget. I'm looking in the last 2 weeks with auto and home insurance policies going through the roof, right? 22% auto, 46 home, 36 combined, and I'm just like, this is crazy. I need to self-insure, and so I think you can pass some of that, maybe not to the entire community, but to the people that are knowledgeable and have ideas on, you know, and similar in the balanced budget model, I would hope that you'd get some of that feedback also from your principals, right? That, hey, this is your allocation this year, but 5 years from now, it's gonna be this. What smart, innovative things are you starting to do that we can share with other people, right?
And crafting that message in a, like, I don't know how you do it like in a positive way, because we're trying to have people
Yeah,
be in
do it
retention and recruit people, and then also be like, we're cutting like this cool thing. So it's like conflicting messages.
I was thinking of the ambassador type of role as more of a, if the committee ever got too big, such to the point that if it went from 30 to 60 to, you know, so many committee members that we have to turn people away, if you up the requirements a little bit, as far as contributions, whether that's, you know, submitting things in advance before the meeting, or taking notes, or summarizing, or putting the you know, having a secretary or a subcommittee that wrote up the results and put them on the website to offload some of the clerical tasks from Denise, and get them out there more timely. I think people are willing to contribute. I think it's tricky 4 times a year where you just come in and you read a couple things and you have this meeting, and you have to put a little more preparation and thought into lining everything up, or you don't really know what you're going to get. You might get a lot on classroom sizes and unemployment.
I'm just kind of both planting a seed for you and for board members. The way in the, you've just had a few meetings since we kind of expanded the membership of the committee, and so we're still thinking through the process. One way to do it, which certainly we should do, is to be updating you on the budget as it's developed, and then to the point we've made a couple times tonight, letting you know how it went, both in the board's approval and in the audit. The other thing that we haven't really done much of, but I think could be very helpful, is sometimes we face very significant, specific problems around development of the budget. And I could see us also presenting some of those problems to the committee for informed feedback as we go forward. And I'll just sort of take the risk of naming one, but I want to be super clear. This is not, this is just a conversational study session point, and it's one that should not be confused with backtracking on any of the commitments in our referendum. So we have said that for at least the first 5 years of the 10-year referendum, we won't close schools, we won't eliminate major cuts in programs, we won't raise class sizes. I'm confident we can do that. In order to get it passed, we also said we were gonna spend specific amounts on about 25 specific programs. And we did that because after the referendum failed in 2023, one of the sources of feedback we got was, well, I know it was for technology, but I didn't know exactly what my money was gonna go for. And so if you look in the budget book, this year we've almost without exception allocated exactly the dollars we said we would in the referendum. There are a couple instances, though, in which, for instance, a change in state or federal funding meant we had other funding for that purpose. So we're still meeting the expectation, but it's not all coming literally from referendum dollars. And so that's the kind of thing that I would love to talk through, like, with the committee and say, when we say that, how do we, first of all, what do you think of that? If we're still meeting the school counselor number, but it's not necessarily coming by referendum dollars, or another one of those, how should we think about that problem of keeping faith with the community, but also reflecting the fact that the context is changing around us every single year, and it will for the 10 years of the referendum. That'd be the kind of thing that I think we could come and really say, how should we think about, you know, that problem? What are the guardrails that we should be concerned about? Because I would find that valuable, and we would describe it in more precision, you know, than I have now. Because another way to think about keeping faith with that referendum is that less than the specific programs that are in each of the categories about accelerating student learning, struggling students, we have these, you could keep faith with each category as opposed to the specific programs within it. And would the committee say, yep, that's still keeping faith with your investing in our kids who are the Harvard and Yale kids, and then the kids who need more support and things like that. Those would be really interesting, and I haven't, looking at Denise, I haven't thought about, we encounter them all the time, and I haven't thought about saying, hey, let's take that to CBAC. Like, let's actually pose that problem. We don't want to seem like we're sort of stage managing the stuff that the committee wants to look at, but these are very real time. It's actually how we hit the reset button this year on our student school board. Instead of kind of saying, what do you all think should happen? We said, okay, we're going to do a cell phone ban. What do you think about that, and how should it work? Or we have an attendance crisis. What should we do about attendance? And it actually has really been very useful, because going in and asking high school students, like, what should we do, was generating like a zillion different, not very focused ideas.
They want their phones all the time.
Yeah,
for sure.
right. So then we've said, well, we're not going to get rid of it, but how should we do it? You know, and so it's been a pretty good shift with that this year. And
I'd have to look back to see like how you worded it. So, so I was the executive director for an airline passenger experience association. And so when we did kind of like an annual report like that of, you know, here's what we're going to set out to do, like, I guess like you're intentionally vague on the specifics. So I'm assuming we'd have to look at before the meeting, you know, kind of what was said, and how to address like one specific thing or all of them. I personally, as a parent, I don't know about you, I mean, if you're meeting all of like the big buckets, and especially with declining enrollment, I mean, that's a pretty big feat.
I think it also depends on, you know, you're meeting the broad requirements. What are you going to do with the excess money? Can you invest it? Can you pay down some debt? You know, and those are ideas you could propose to the committee to brainstorm to.
yeah,
But do we top up the rainy day fund? So as we're drawing down on it, you know, those kind of.
Or I'm assuming
Or you
that
get a new grant for something, you know, things can change and all of a sudden you get a grant that flows into the same thing the referendum is, you know. We manage our household budgets the same way, right? If we allocate something to this and some other source of income comes along, we'll figure out how to move that somewhere else.
yeah, that's a super helpful thought, because you could say it's all still staying in the referendum bucket, but you can shift among the priorities that the voters endorsed.
Mhm.
So we're not actually using it for fund balance. I'm just thinking in
Yeah.
real time. But we are gonna reallocate as student needs change, as laws change,
Okay.
within the referendum priorities. So we're not shifting that, we're meeting those,
Yeah.
but we're not also, you know, frozen in time.
If it was easier to get a grant for something that you had covered in the referendum and to slide that, I'd be all for moving that money somewhere else. Right?
That's just one example.
Then to not do the grant because we already had it covered.
Thank you.
So, Director Rowland, go ahead.
I'm curious, having served on advisory committees in the past, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this, so I suppose simply saying it is the best way. How do you feel regarding the fact that while you are encouraged to raise questions, to recommend options or solutions, realizing that the questions you raise, the options you provide are the solutions that are well thought out, and you may be spot on in terms of from where you sit and the facts or information you're provided. How do you feel regarding the fact that when all is said and done, you're not actually making the decision, you're simply offering, sharing insight, input? I know how I had to manage that, and I didn't necessarily, going into the advisory board or committee role, understand that fully, and I had an expectation that I thought what we said was going to actually be potentially implemented. But I'm curious. I don't want to project where I was onto you, but I'm just curious.
I don't think I've had those same issues. I don't know if Denise articulated kind of the ground rules, and I didn't have the expectation that any of the ideas would be implemented. So in some ways it's kind of freeing because we can come and we can think of all these wild, crazy ideas. I think we need to do a better job of attributing those to individuals and then allowing people to kind of upvote or, say, hey, that's a really good idea, let's prioritize these, in this list. If we went through there in the committee itself, rank some of those so we could kind of bubble up the most important ones.
Yeah, kind of like what you do at like a strategic planning meeting is like everybody has like 10, monopoly dollars, and then there's the cups and everybody can put in, and then those are the main priorities. But I would agree that Denise did a really good job of, setting the expectations, even though we're kind of not like moving around, but just the enrollment thing, I think, kind of like threw us. So we're kind of, I think we all kind of knew. And I just have to say too that it actually made me feel like more confident in the education system here, working with Denise and working with these two gentlemen, because we're really lucky that we have such dedicated, smart people working behind the scenes. So.
Dr. Wagner?
And just to piggyback off of what Director Barlow said, do you feel that there's a good feedback loop? So when you give information, I think one of you said earlier that, you would like better feedback from the feedback pretty much that you're giving. So, because we don't want to, I guess my concern with any committee when we create these things with good intentions is we don't want this to end up being a checkbox. So, yeah, we ran it by them and we're still doing, our thing over here. So do you feel that that full circle communication is good, or is there somewhere that's lacking there? Because I did hear you say that you would like the better feedback, and then you would, maybe need more information so you can know, how well you are doing in the information that you all are providing, or do you feel a little ghosted?
I definitely don't feel ghosted because I'm here getting the feedback from you right now. Whether that scales to the other 28 people on the committee, we'll have to see. As far as how many people watch the study sessions or whatnot.
They're so fun.
We also get a really good recap after the meetings, and then encouraged to write Denise if there's something else that comes up, so then we can circle back to that. I think the hard part is that it's quarterly, and so although it's hard to ask volunteers to come in more often, I think that might be helpful, because then we might be able to, instead of provide feedback, actually kind of tackle some of the issues, if that is something that's asked of us.
I think that there's a space there for committee work too. So, and maybe
branches.
Depending on, you know, your interest level or time availability, some members might choose to participate in committees and others might want to stick with the quarterly meetings. But, so I think that might be a way to differentiate involvement, just regularity of that communication as well.
Director McLaughlin.
So I'm one of the school board members that's assigned to the committee, along with Director Cook. I really apologize for missing the last meeting because of scheduling conflict. But that's one of the challenges about quarterly meetings too, is when you miss. I guess my question for the two of you is there anything that as school board members we can do to assist either in the back and forth between the board or the work that you envision the committee doing? There's different information we can provide or insight or
I think if you took an idea up and it was well received and, you know, proposed for implementation, I think bringing that back to the next meeting would be, you know, just kind of a pat on the back, like, you know, some kind of acknowledgement that, hey, thanks. Yep. Just to kind of make that more two ways, right? You know, so we're giving you the ideas here, and we give you them quarterly, but if in your other meetings, something came up and, you know, James said we should have a finance dashboard, let's go make a finance dashboard. If, you know, I see that, then I go, hey, cool.
And also just to give even different direction or more focused direction from the school board, just so like we're not rehashing all of this again.
That's kind of the danger too, and that's why I think maybe formalize the commitment, maybe go from 2 to 3 years, like I was proposing before we started recording, you know, kind of a year to get up to speed, a year to really contribute, and then a year to kind of bring some of the next people, and kind of, you know, even if you take the 30 and you know, do 10, 10, 10, type thing like that, and kind of cascade it through. Otherwise, you are going to kind of feel like deja vu all over again as you have this meeting annually, right? And we should also bring some of this back to the committee too, and what we talked about, right? Have a slide in the next meeting where we can.
Speaking of commitment, right now it's quarterly. Do you get the sense that it's the kind of committee that needs to move to every 2 months, meeting more times a year?
I think quarterly's good with a little more time to prepare. If we had kind of the slides for the hot button issues and some of the breakout discussion questions in advance and kind of bubbled some of those things back, kind of made it a dynamic agenda, I think the cadence is right.
As long as there's, I think, subcommittees like we were talking about that are working on specific issues, I think,
They could meet more frequently.
Yeah, they could meet more frequently. I think there's several people, including myself, that would love to deep dive into what other, you know, districts are doing, you know, better communication models in terms of budget and just overall, like, excellence within the school.
And I would add to that too, it seems like in my attendance at the meetings and participation, it seems like that committee structure is a natural flow from the size of the group and the structure already.
I know that a lot of the information you've been provided has been really focused on the budgets. Although you did bring up, the committee did bring up a number of, what's the word I want to look for, interactions between budget decisions and programming decisions. So, like, how does the SCIP, School Continuous Improvement Plan, relate to budget decisions? And, you know, how do some, I think there's a perception, Katie talked about perceptions in the community, that we make decisions here. The school board makes decisions, the superintendent makes decisions, sort of independent of anything else. But I think the more you get into the budget, you learn how much our decisions are bounded by those buckets, by those restrictions on how we can use the money. Do you think that's an important understanding for the committee to come to, is the interaction between concrete programs or things people see in the schools and how it's related to the machinations of making the budget sausage.
So like for example, like the curriculum, would
Right.
that be one? I think that's really interesting. I think that would be interesting to see, especially, I mean, how, that could also be a marketing point of, really taking data and really utilizing it, to enhance the curriculum for each grade level. And also, I think there's a couple policies as well. For instance, like if a seventh grader doesn't have like their homework done, but they can turn it in until the end of the semester and still have it graded at full. So there's like things like that that I think, and like the cell phone or busing, a lot of people, especially grade school, like that affects people too, getting kids to school at 7:45 in the morning. So I think, I agree with you. I think that'd be really interesting because all of those things have budget implications.
So showing more connections between those, maybe make it a little bit more concrete for people to understand.
Yeah, yeah, and I think when we looked at the budget, I mean, there's just so many things that are just, you have, like there isn't, I feel like, a lot of wiggle room, like it's salaries, it's building maintenance, it's like, and then there's only like a certain fraction where you can kind of play with it or like manipulate it a little bit.
I would say, these questions here were all from the last meeting. There are meeting minutes from the one before where we talked about kind of revenue and ideas for growth, and there were, probably just as many equally good ideas that came out of that March meeting. Anything from expanding early childhood to more sites, as a gateway to get, people, the fact that Mighty Oaks is moving north is a good thing. And, expanding that, school times, marketing, saying what we're doing well. This one was budget focused, but there were equally as many good ideas about revenue kind of growth generation.
Denise, should I touch briefly for the board on the changes we want to make to the charge statement, or is that something you were planning to do? I can do that conversationally.
That would be great if you.
Okay, so I think you all, board members have, and it's available on Assembly, changes we propose, and we know that this is a board committee, so that ultimately want to just get, if you have any reactions to this now, and we will put this onto the board agenda, should the chair so agree, that we want to revoke the requirement that decisions shall be made by consensus, which I think was in there out of good intentions, but as we get into tougher issues, I think it would be still useful if we can tell the board, the committee voted 60-40 for X, but it wasn't consensus. So we would shift that requirement. And then most importantly, we would shift, as I explained at the outset of this meeting, our structure from being representatives of essentially the big organizations in our community to people who are interested, connected to RPS and willing to serve. That we would have, we do propose striking the requirement for 2 high school students. That wouldn't preclude them. It would not have it be a requirement. I think as our youth empowerment work goes forward, we'll be having a lot of discussions about youth voice, and it's something that Will and Sarah Louise think a lot about. This was not something we were able to meet the first 2 years of the committee, just for high school kids to come to something like this. I think that as we get into the next strategic plan, youth voice will, I'm predicting, be a strong theme. I don't think being part of a finance committee is the best place to be seeking that youth voice. Again, if someone wanted to serve, absolutely, we could do it. It's just changing the requirement. We would add requirements, representatives of the Rochester Principals Association and the Rochester Education Association, our teachers and principals unions. And we would tweak the name that was on it's the Community Budget Advisory Committee as opposed to the Finance Budget Advisory Committee. So any reactions to those, just again, in a study session, just for feedback, we will work with the chair and vice chair to put this on a future agenda, but we don't want to be so far off the board's charge in the membership of this committee as we currently are. Having talked it through with the chair and vice chair, we wanted to see what kind of interest we got. It's been fantastic. So we'd like to formalize this approach and then probably early in the fall, put it into the process.
I guess one of the questions for our finance team, our superintendent, as well as our CBAC members is how important is it that we designate and make the timing of a meeting specifically aligned to your seeing the draft of the budget, and where one of the reports we're receiving from you is your feedback on next year's budget before we take our vote in June.
I think that I'm glad that you mentioned the strategic plan, because really that's what we should be executing against. So I think we should probably do maybe a deeper dive. I know that we did a little bit on what the strategic, what is the next strategic plan?
Starting the development this
Okay.
summer.
Okay.
Next fall will be the high gear
Okay.
public part of
So I
it.
think learning a lot about that and what the priorities are will be key in determining where we have recommendations, because we are to serve that strategic plan.
I think you do want to have the CBAC committee see the budget before it is approved. That wouldn't have as much impact for us to follow up feedback after the fact, although you could carry it all the way forward to the next FY '27 or '28. But yeah, I think the timing is somewhat important there. I realize it's sensitive, there's a ton of work probably to put it all together. So getting that all to line up on the right quarter boundary, may not be doable. I think there's some flexibility in moving our meeting dates around a little bit. If we met, 2 times in 4 months and then had a longer gap in the summer, I don't think that's as big a deal.
Yeah, because fiscal year is July 1.
I would agree. I think it's important, even if, and let's just say it, we should all be enjoying this year, because this is the year with no cuts. It's because of the referendum, because of good stewardship of the budget, because the legislature has basically come in kind of where we needed them to. But were this, like my colleague I talked to, Anoka Hennepin, cutting $20 million this week, it would be a different situation. So I think it's important to have this meeting on the calendar, and should the committee want to talk about something that is not the budget and say, yep, we think the budget's fine, we really are, we're focused on enrollment or your insurance plan or your fund balance, that actually, I think, would still guarantee the input. The other place that we've shared it every year the committee has been in place, but I don't know that we were quite as much in dialogue with the committee as we could be, which is the development of a budget parameters we bring to the board at the start of the budget process. So every year since I've been here, we've had the board pass parameters that are basically our marching orders for the development of the budget. And then John and Andy show how we met those parameters, assuming we met the parameters, which we have. I think having CBAC have a real discussion of what do you think those parameters should be at the start of the budget process is another good source of input. And so then when we bring the parameters, which we've usually done in January, when we bring them to the board, we could say, we've shared this with the committee budget committee. They were particularly concerned about this. That one they said not so much. They added this. I think the parameters is another good place for that feedback, because we really do take those seriously. Go back to that as our North Star during the budget process. And I think we could time the meetings to have us help think that through.
Any other questions, comments, or kudos?
Just thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the questions that the committee asked was why, what was the board interested in when we agreed or decided to do this advisory committee? And I think as, you know, the superintendent mentioning that we've had 5 clean audits, and I think the board expresses its confidence in how we have evolved this budget process. And I will tell you, over the years that I have been a school board watcher and a school board member, we have definitely evolved the transparency and the intentional steps of how we let the community know that the pieces of the budget are coming together. I think the balanced budget model is the latest step in that evolution. But that communication piece that you mentioned, simply having a group of people who are willing to invest the time in getting educated and informed at a level that you wouldn't do ordinarily, and then getting your feedback of how we need to help you understand it better, communicate it better, talk about it so that it's better understood by your group, is going to help us better communicate it to the broader community and accomplish not just the strategic plan goals we have now, but tackle the issues that, you know, we've laid on the table and we know face us. But it does feel good to have 32 more people out there on our team intentionally working on this. So we do appreciate it. Please take that back to the committee, and we look forward to hearing from you again.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Our next item, other business. Our ABCD update is available in Assembly for our future meetings. Our upcoming meeting agenda items, June 17th, we have retiree recognition. Monitoring will be the introduction of the long-term budget strategy for the first time. We have a second prep for action on our policy committee recommendations from May, and our action item is action on the 2025-26 budget proposal. The next meeting is a regular meeting on July 15th. We'll have a monitoring item on the discipline and attendance data review and initiatives update for the 2024-25 school year. A prep for action item on the long-term budget strategy, and then the first prep for action of the long-term facilities maintenance plan approval and facility utilization update, along with a closed session on labor negotiations. Are there any agenda items board members would like to raise for consideration for a future meeting agenda? Hearing none, you heard we have regular meetings on June 17th, July 15th, and July 22nd, and then we have a regular meeting on August 5th, but a note ahead of time that that is going to be a meeting from 4 to 6 p.m. so that we can accommodate the National Night Out celebrations. And hearing no other business, this meeting is adjourned at 6:52 p.m.